You're listening to Coyotes, Cougars, Californians, Views on Changing Animal Relations at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, an article published in the journal Animal History in 2025, read by the author, Allison Lawrence. For the people of Los Angeles, past, present, and future, the dioramas were made for you. On an ordinary Friday morning in the spring of 2023, a coyote went for a walk in Woodland Hills. It was dark still, and most of the humans in that Los Angeles neighborhood nestled against the Santa Monica Mountains were asleep. The hours before dawn are productive for urban coyotes. Though typically diurnal, coyotes that live in close proximity to people tend to shift their activity to the late evening and early morning hours when fewer humans are about. Around 4 a.m., perhaps in search of a snack, this particular coyote entered a family home through an unsecured pet door. The alarm was raised by Lily, the family's 14-year-old cat. Footage captured by home security cameras shows cat and coyote equally agitated by the encounter. The standoff ended when one of the humans awoke and scared the coyote away. Though pets are sometimes part of the urban coyote's diet, Lily survived the ordeal, as did the family's French bulldog and Pomeranian. This was not an isolated incident. The previous spring in that same foothill neighborhood, 3 senior rescue beagles, Kobe, Lemon Drop, and Bob, picked up an unfamiliar scent inside their home. Curious as to what activated the hound's tracking instincts, the human homeowner consulted her surveillance footage. The camera with a view of the yard's dedicated dog run showed a coyote just before midnight scaling a 6-foot fence and pushing into the home through the flap meant for the beagles. This coyote spent several minutes inside unnoticed, though people and pets were present. The homeowner, head of a nonprofit dog rescue organization, told reporters that the neighborhood had seen other close encounters in recent weeks. It was this same coyote, she suspected, who attacked a pet dog only days before, and who was chased out of a backyard by another. "We're not going to be able to get rid of them," the homeowner conceded. To prevent subsequent visits from the unwelcome kind of canine, she boarded up her dog door. These stories, though particularly sensational, are representative of encounters happening all across Los Angeles County, between the 10 million or so people and countless wild creatures who live in the metropolitan area. The place now called Los Angeles has been a biodiversity hotspot for many millennia, given its mild climate and variety of habitats clustered there. It remains so today, though urbanization challenges native wildlife to adapt. Freeways fragment territories, cars make migrations more dangerous, introduced species compete for resources, pesticides poison the food chain. And then there are the humans, who make seemingly arbitrary decisions about which, when, and where wild animals are welcome. Despite these challenges, wildlife goes on. In this accidental ecosystem, to borrow Peter S. Alagona's phrase, yards, lawns, parks, cemeteries, and streets are potential meeting grounds for people, pets, and the predators who look on the former as prey. The biological imperatives that motivate coyotes and cougars are incommensurate with notions of private property or the sanctity of a pet's life. This is the reality and the responsibility that the beagle's owner accepted when she secured her home, if not her backyard, against coyotes. Sometimes the outcome is bloodier for the pets, and on very rare occasions for the people. Sometimes predators are removed, sometimes they are exterminated. While this is a story about Los Angeles, coyotes and other wild animals have made their way into metropolitan areas across the United States, leading to contests over who belongs and questions about how to coexist. At the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, Angelenos are prompted to reflect on their own encounters with the region's wildlife through habitat dioramas that depict native predators both as inhabitants of remote environments and as established residents of the city. drawing on the work of Donna Haraway, Sally Gregory Kolstad, and other scholars who have shown how taxidermied animals created in the 19th and early 20th centuries reflect and reify societal values. This essay demonstrates how the museum simultaneously perpetuates and resists inherited values through the creation of new exhibits and the revision of old ones. Analysis of a cougar diorama mounted in the 1930s and a coyote diorama created in the 1950s extends existing arguments about how habitat groups, in an effort to present an idealized wilderness, uphold prevailing gender norms and otherwise show society to itself. Attention to more recent displays featuring the very same species, including a diorama depicting LA's backyard and an exhibit focused on a local celebrity cougar called P22, reveals the museum reflecting critically on its own history in response to environmental, cultural, and institutional change. Importantly, there is no neat distinction between historical and contemporary displays because the dioramas at this museum are not static. They were and still are continually updated, owing to a unique design that allows the front panel of glass to be lifted, permitting staff easy entry to the scene. The museum's current taxidermist, Tim Bovard, works to keep the older dioramas engaging and impactful by touching up plants and animal mounts that have started to show their age, and occasionally by introducing new animals or objects into a scene. Though not all of the changes made over the past century have been documented, some notable edits to North American mammal groups demonstrate how inherited displays can be made to offer visitors new ways of seeing nature. This essay draws on archival research, recorded interviews with taxidermist Tim Bovard, and site visits, along with histories of predator control and studies of animal behavior to contextualize and analyze the museum's coyote and cougar displays, which reflect a century of changing animal relations in the Los Angeles basin. These displays do not merely mirror relations between people and other animals. Rather, the museum's evolving ethics and display practices, in concert with allied displays, such as newspaper coverage and trail camera footage of urban wildlife, advance a variety of attitudes about local wild animals, ranging from ambivalence to acceptance to awe. While the historical dioramas display native predators at a distance, the urban wildlife exhibits developed in the 21st century naturalize the presence of coyotes and cougars in Los Angeles, inviting visitors to see wild animals as neighbors and challenging them to reassess obligations among local communities, non-human and human alike. By focusing on the display of native species whose extermination was once incentivized by the state, and attending to how display practices have changed over time, this study traces how habitat dioramas and other museum displays work within an evolving media landscape to define and revise boundaries of belonging. The Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, originally the Los Angeles County Museum of History, Science, and Art, and hereafter NHMLA, opened in 1913, when the population of the fast-growing county was just over 500,000 residents. It is located in Exposition Park, a neighborhood in the south region of the city that has, for over a century, been a cultural hub of museums, outdoor recreation, and sporting venues. The Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum opened there in 1923 as the home arena for the University of Southern California Trojans football team, and it has served as occasional host for other college, professional, and Olympic sporting events over the decades. By the 1920s, the NHMLA was collecting specimens and accepting donations from sport hunting patrons to fill 4 planned habitat halls. Art historian Karen Wonders has described habitat dioramas as mausoleums of a vanishing heritage, intended to offer transportive and educational experiences to an urban public alienated from its natural past. Indeed, when the habitat diorama developed as a natural historical art form in the United States at the end of the 19th century, people were moving into cities and, it seemed, away from nature. At the same time, wildlife populations were noticeably dwindling due to a variety of factors, including excessive sport hunting, the hide industry, habitat loss, and commercial use of feathers and fur. Taxidermists like William T. Hornaday, Carl Akeley, and others used habitat groups to raise awareness about wildlife loss and amplified the issue beyond their museums through popular writing and conservation advocacy. The rush to collect threatened animals for museum display at the turn of the 20th century was not always in the interest of saving them. Sometimes it reflected a resigned determination to collect creatures before they went extinct. Historian of science Paul D. Brinkman calls this practice salvage zoology. If their kind could not be saved, at least their existence was documented, or so the reasoning went. The habitat diorama is a fatalistic art form, according to NHMLA exhibit developer Matt Davis, because the diorama treats death as inevitable, which of course it is, and through that logic demands that individual animals die as representatives of their species. In some cases, taxidermists' work and the ecological perspective offered by habitat groups did lead to positive environmental outcomes, influencing the creation of nature reserves and contributing to the recovery of threatened species. The forestalled extinction of the American bison, several kinds of seals, and a variety of wading birds is attributed to the taxidermy conservation complex. The urgent message embedded in some early habitat dioramas that time is running out for wildlife around the world is undermined somewhat by the suspension of time that such displays endeavored to achieve. According to Hannah Rose Schell, an interdisciplinary scholar of science and media, taxidermy aspired to render a transitory moment permanent. For feminist science studies scholar Donna Haraway, the diorama's photographic vision enacted control over time and space, with animals inside the diorama frozen and human viewers beyond the frame transfixed, participants in the social relations of domination that brought the display into being. Each diorama is a historical artifact. To an uncritical eye, though, wilderness scenes exist outside of history, what cultural theorist Mika Ball has termed a denial of time. Though habitat dioramas developed in part to connect urban publics to nature, suspended scenes of animals in remote wilds simultaneously kept that nature at a temporal and geographic distance. This is particularly notable when habitat groups feature local wildlife. Consider the cougar, a native predator whose presence in the Los Angeles basin predates California by many millennia. When settlers arrived with livestock, cougars were there to take an easy meal. In the 19th century, ranchers organized hunting parties to do away with the threat to their economic interests. By the early 20th century, predator control programs were enacted at the federal, state, and county levels to incentivize lion hunting and protect the interests of ranchers as well as game hunters. From 1907 until 1963, California cougars lived and died with a bounty on their heads, a bounty promoted by the Los Angeles Times, which reported sensationally unsuccessful lion hunts. Due to coverage in the Times, cougars were known to Angelenos as wild animals entangled with the region's ranching industry and hunting culture. Despite the well-documented proximity of cougars, the diorama that went on display at the NHMLA circa 1932 abided by contemporary conventions in depicting these animals at a distance. The chosen location suggests that the appropriate and natural place for these animals is set apart from the places where people are. Visitors meet the cougar group on the first floor of the museum, in the first of two halls dedicated to North American mammal dioramas. The scene transports viewers from Los Angeles to the Owens Valley, a high desert environment east of the Sierra Nevada, 250 miles away into Inyo County. At the center of the scene, a mother cougar reclines while her cubs play. One of the youngsters holds his paw aloft as if about to swipe his mother's flicking tail. Good practice for when he one day meets a snake. Following Jane Desmond, whose scholarship on non-humans attends to embodiment and performance, arrested motion poses are effective indices of a once-living animal. A taxidermied body presented in the midst of an action suggests the potential, if not the capacity, to finish that movement. This is the craft of killing through which FARAWAY argues life is constructed. The possibility contained in the young cougar's pose, the liveliness on display, exists in ironic tension with the fact that an individual animal died to display how his kind more generally might behave. His life is constructed through his necessary death at the hands, through the handiwork of humans involved in his display. For FARAWAY, a taxidermied animal's gaze holds a viewer in communion and allows for specular commerce between the viewer's reality and the atemporal wilderness on display. Not all dioramas invite such transaction. Some preserve the distance between the two worlds. Consider once more the female cougar in Figure 1. Though her gaze is turned toward the mammal hull, she does not make eye contact with the viewer. Her line of sight is too low, and the angle is awkward. Instead, the viewer is to imagine this cougar sees only mountains and open sky. Crafted to approximate rather than ape life, her glass eyes must remain oblivious to the humans who look upon her. That is, if the cougars were aware of humans in such proximity, they might scamper, they might attack. The mother would not be so relaxed. There is another cougar in this scene, though viewers may not notice him at first. An adult male watches from his position upon a higher rock, posed in mid-stride as if climbing down to join the family. This is not typical cougar behavior, as the species notes in the exhibit files attest. No family life. Female raises kittens and rarely permits a male in vicinity. Male cougars are highly territorial. If an adult male comes across a female and her cubs, even if they are his own, the encounter could end in bloodshed. Yet nothing in the scene suggests this is anything but a happy feline family. Nor did the exhibit text highlight that such an assemblage was atypical. These animals were formerly found over practically all of North America, a placard, since replaced, informed visitors. Their food consists of deer, wapiti, mountain sheep, antelope, and domestic stock. They also prey upon almost all of the smaller mammals, birds, and even, it is said, grasshoppers. Neither the historical nor the updated text mentions intraspecific competition, though the version on display today informs visitors that cougars hunt alone, ambushing their prey from behind, which may prompt some critical thinkers to wonder if the male is in fact about to pounce. The cougar diorama was created under the direction of Melville Lincoln, a foreground artist promoted in 1930 to oversee the museum's relatively new diorama program. Lincoln was responsible for overseeing the ecological accuracy of the habitat groups, which were collective endeavors that involved coordination of hunters and trappers, taxidermists, artists, and administrators. While dioramas might feature a particular species, they were not focused on that species in isolation. Rather, they showed animals in relation to their environments, a reflection of the growing influence of ecological science. Lincoln's journals detail his frequent field visits to collect reference materials, including photographs and plant matter, revealing an understanding of and commitment to exhibiting entire ecologies. Ultimately, Lincoln and taxidermist Herman T. Beck included the male in the cougar diorama despite the knowledge that it was not a representative scene, in the interest of offering visitors diverse examples of the same species. Here, representations of authentic animal behavior were subordinated to a comparative illustration of male, female, adult, and juvenile specimens. It was a practical solution to space constraints, but one that undeniably intersected with prevailing social values, naturalizing the nuclear family unit by depicting it where it did not exist in nature. Melville Lincoln was partial to exhibiting family groups, a preference made clear in his correspondence about which specimens to collect and in his public remarks. He once told the Los Angeles Times, "We like to have a full family represented in each of our groups," though he also admitted that wild animals don't have a conventional family life. Lincoln was not alone in this preference. By the 1930s, when the Cougar family went on view, there were decades of precedent for reproducing family dynamics and gender norms by way of animal display. From the late 19th century, mammal groups tended to follow a formula identified by historian of science Sally Gregory Kolstedt, where a male adopts a protective stance, the female is a nurturer, and the young are playful and attractive. Though the cougar diorama puts the focus on the female in the foreground, her pose is submissive and vulnerable compared to that of the male cougar dominant upon the rocks. These cougars offer a particular vision of gendered family life, a model for viewers to reproduce. While early 20th century museum visitors were implicitly encouraged to learn from the cougars, they received no instructions on how to live with them. The county and the state were more interested in eliminating depredation and securing the agricultural economy against loss. In the 1930s, California was promising $20 for a male cougar. Hunters who bagged a female cougar, thereby preventing more from being born, collected $30. Counties offered payouts in addition to the monies provided by the state. Predator control programs assigned the cougar value in death. So too did wilderness scenes, which presented local wildlife at a geographic remove, but made that life familiar through implicit visual messaging about appropriate social relations. The cougars had been on display for over 2 decades when a coyote group joined them in the North American Mammal Hall. This diorama, also set in the arid Owens Valley, where California gives way to Nevada, depicts a family of coyotes gathered near their den. The male has just returned from a successful hunt, holding in his jaws a black-tailed jackrabbit, a prey item common to the area and a reliable source of calories for these omnivores. The female, who has watched over the litter during the male's absence, acknowledges the arrival of food, her nose turned toward the rabbit's scent. One of the pups stands at attention, but the rest are otherwise engaged, either playing in the dirt or napping through the heat of the day. While coyotes can thrive in diverse environments, this diorama, crafted in the 1950s, maintains the traditional wilderness aesthetic of historical habitat groups. The coyotes, like the cougars before them, withhold their gaze. The background painting by Robert C. Clark emphasizes that this terrain is an unforgiving one, only desert and mountains as far as the eye can see. Though it's late spring or early summer, judging by the age of the pups, the peaks of the Sierra Nevada are still buried beneath a healthy winter snowpack. As nature would have it, the snow that Clark painted here would eventually melt and flow down the Sierra's eastern slope to feed rivers and lakes in the region. The farmers and ranchers of the Owens Valley were reliant upon this runoff. In 1913, William Mulholland and his Los Angeles aqueduct began diverting water from Owens Lake. The aqueduct altered the region's ecosystem and led to the collapse of its farming economy. At the same time, this new source of water allowed the population of Los Angeles to increase dramatically. Given the extensive press coverage related to the aqueduct in the 1920s, including intentional sabotage by aggrieved farmers and accidental dam collapse due to shoddy engineering, many in the region would have understood the material link between Los Angeles and the Owens Valley. But was it still apparent a generation later? Did it occur to Robert C. Clark, as he worked on the diorama's background circa 1952, that his Sierra Nevada scene had been heavily altered by human hands? Perhaps, as he cleaned his brushes in a glass of water and dipped the dampened bristles into white paint, he thought to himself how remarkable it was to be painting snow on the Sierra with water that had once been snow on the Sierra. The coyote diorama obscures human intervention on the environment, but that is not the only artifice. The mountains that Clark painted are an approximation rather than a duplication of the Eastern Sierra. The museum's archive reveals how the Coyote family, too, was contrived. In January 1952, Melville Lincoln wrote to James Lundigan in the California Department of Fish and Game with a request. I need coyotes, and I want a family, Mama, Papa, and enough youngsters to be considered a litter. It is my desire to construct a group showing a den and something of their family life. Unlike male cougars, male coyotes do remain with their mates and help rear the pups. Lundigan arranged for one of the state trappers to catch the coyotes at no cost, but he advised Lincoln that if he really wanted youngsters, then the trapper would have to wait a few months for the coyotes to give birth. Lincoln replied urgently to explain that he preferred to acquire adult coyotes with their late winter coats. He reasoned, pelts this time of year are in much better condition, and so if the trapper will take adults for us now and pups later, we will be very happy. Lincoln acknowledged that bringing together unrelated animals that were collected at different times of the year may be taking liberties with scientific accuracy. The artifice was, he argued, in service of the illusion. It makes for a much better group, and only the experienced eye would detect the difference. Lincoln drove out to the Owens Valley in August 1953 to visit a den site, take reference photographs, and pick up a half-dozen pups from the state trapper's cold storage facility in Big Pine. Just a couple weeks later, after his staff had skinned the pups and prepared them for tanning, Lincoln began to question his constructed coyote family. He reached out to the trapper, Hugo Herman, to request even younger specimens. Smaller pups would have a greater appeal to the public and better fit the space allotted to them. I know we will have to wait until next spring, but if you think smaller animals are possible, then I will hold up construction of the group. In late April 1954, Lincoln returned to Big Pine to collect a new litter of pups, only 3 weeks old and still alive, from Herman, who had been feeding them a concoction of canned milk and water. Lincoln drove the young coyotes back to Los Angeles. He purchased milk and kitty litter for their temporary care. He took photographs and documented their behaviors. A week after their arrival, one of the pups bit taxidermist George N. Adams, resulting in a visit from the health department and a requisite quarantine period. In his journal entry for May 13th, 1954, Lincoln wrote around the unpleasant eventuality that had been coming for weeks. He recorded that the quarantine had been lifted and that taxidermists Adams and Beck planned on gassing pups today. When Lincoln requested an additional litter of coyotes in the service of aesthetics and emotional appeal, he revealed a casual attitude toward their collection that was enabled by the very same predator control policies that made cougars valuable in death. Since 1891, California had enacted a variety of predator control plans, including $5 bounties, in order to reduce coyotes' depredations on sheep, cattle, deer, and other animals considered more valuable to the economy. In 1952, the state's Department of Fish and Game employed 35 trappers, including Hugo Herman, the man who collected for Lincoln, that together killed 1,991 coyotes. In the same year, the federal program run by the Bureau of Sport, Fisheries, and Wildlife took 6,166 coyotes. By the time this diorama went on display, nearly 250,000 coyotes had been killed on record. Given the ongoing state and federal-funded efforts to eliminate these animals, Lincoln may have understood his request for more pups as a harmless one. They would have been killed regardless. It is curious, then, that species notes in the exhibit files offer a flattering portrait of the coyote. An undated manuscript, which might represent the exhibit label that Lincoln composed in the summer of 1955, declares, "The male is a good husband and helps feed, defend, and train the pups." Indeed, in the diorama, it is the male coyote that has brought the jackrabbit home to feed his family, though females hunt for their pups as well. The manuscript continues, Although the coyote is a carnivore, he will eat anything edible, such as grass, fruit of the prickly pear cactus, mesquite beans, juniper berries, and all sorts of cultivated fruits. However, rodents form his chief diet, and because of this, he is a very beneficial animal and should, in most places, be protected. This description characterizes the coyote as useful and deserving of protections, directly at odds with the logic of contemporary predator control programs, which incentivize the extermination of an animal deemed a threat to the agricultural economy. Even if this language did not accompany the diorama, the portrayal of the coyotes is a sympathetic one. The mama and papa, as Lincoln referred to them, fulfill their prescribed roles as carer and provider, respectively, and the pups, expertly mounted by Adams, are adorable. Was the diorama a critique of contemporary extermination policies, a call for increased environmental protections? Lincoln's journals are quiet on these questions. Over the decades, the interpretive materials that accompany the dioramas have been updated. In the 1980s, audio recordings were added to the halls. The coyote tape, which played on a loop in English and then in Spanish, described the coyote as a sly survivor. The traps, the guns, and the poisons that have driven his big brother the wolf to near extinction haven't stopped the coyote from spreading throughout the United States. The secret of his success? He'll eat anything he can swallow. They mate for life and are truly devoted parents. The usual group is male, female, and this brings pups, usually around 7. The audio informed visitors about animal behavior, offered historical context, and emphasized humans' relationships to coyotes in nature and in culture. In Mexico, the narrator explained, the phrase muy coyote, when applied to a human being, means that he's shrewd and crafty, a good businessman. Well, it looks like the coyote, in spite of all that man can do against him, is gonna be in business for quite a while. Though the diorama depicted coyotes at a distance, this companion audio emphasized their presence in environments of all kinds. It's not just the interpretive materials that have evolved. The dioramas, too, are updated to offer more scientifically accurate views on animal behavior and, in some cases, to disrupt the illusion of wilderness through the addition of signifiers, like trash. The NHMLA's taxidermist Tim Bovard, who has worked at the museum since the 1980s, has been influential in evolving the historical form of display for new audiences. In the coyote diorama, he has made modest edits, replacing faded sagebrush and introducing some bird specimens in the foreground. Bovard has made more dramatic changes to some of the other historical dioramas by introducing litter into the landscape. The bobcat, raccoons, bighorn sheep, and gray fox groups all now include garbage, such as aluminum cans and mylar balloon scraps that Bovard has collected on nature walks. The trash is subtle. Some visitors might miss it. Others are surprised or disappointed to see it in a diorama that they expected to show pristine wilderness. Such reactions make Bovard's interventions all the more critical. In the future, visitors might spot trash in even more habitat groups. Speaking in 2022 from the second floor North American Mammal Hall, Bovard remarked, "Almost any of the groups in this room, certainly the California groups, could have trash in them." While historical dioramas are displays of and produced through the social relations of domination, even minor revisions to these inherited exhibits can invite reflection and critique of such dynamics. Whereas the cougar and coyote dioramas obscure the presence of humans, more recently crafted dioramas emphasize how people, settlers in particular, change their environments. One such diorama, a 21st century creation called LA's Backyard, also features a coyote. Visitors can find this simulated backyard tucked away in a far corner of the secondary North American Mammal Hall, one floor above the mid-century Coyotes. Instead of spotlighting a single species, LA's backyard illustrates relationships among animals that have been brought together in large part through human intervention. The central figure here is a coyote that has caught a domestic cat for his next meal. The successful hunter in this scene is male, but this is incidental. When Tim Bovard set to work on this mount, he had only one coyote specimen on hand, a male sporting a winter coat. Bovard would have been just as happy to use a female. Moreover, though posed much like the central predator in the traditional coyote group, the urban coyote looks directly out at his audience. Acclimated to this novel ecosystem, he allows people to meet his gaze. When the scene was in production in the early 2000s, coyote attacks were on the rise in Southern California, especially in suburban areas. Besides the timely coyote cat assemblage, the backyard hosts many other creatures. There are native birds represented here, such as a California quail, mourning dove, and band-tailed pigeon. There are non-native birds as well, including a starling, feral pigeon, and red-fronted parrot, all of which have adapted well to California. The backyard also plays host to a skunk, a ground squirrel, and a raccoon that adult visitors can only really see if they stoop down to stand at kid height. Finally, within the house, there are two more cats. One of them is curled up, perhaps asleep and oblivious to the predatory interloper. The other cat, standing atop a table so as to seem a more menacing opponent, is taxidermied into a perpetual hiss. Prior to the construction of this diorama in 2007, the coyote with a cat was featured in a 2004 exhibition that explored the natural and cultural history of Los Angeles. In LA Light Motion Dreams, he was displayed in the backyard of a modernist Bel Air home, perched upon a diving board above a sparkling pool. Lead curator for LA Light Motion Dreams, Jonathan Spaulding, noted that the team decided to use a coyote here rather than any other animal indicator of the wild because of its historical ties to the region. As a creature native to Southern California and noted throughout Native California oral traditions as a troublesome trickster, that avatar of creative destruction, the coyote is the perfect embodiment of the tensions and opportunities, the beauty and the danger along the lost borders of nature and culture in Los Angeles. The use of the tortoiseshell cat was more arbitrary. The curatorial team had, for a time, considered using a poodle instead, but abandoned the implicit dog-eat-dog message. By putting something domesticated in the jaws of something wild, the exhibit aimed to illustrate an ongoing contest between the city and its natures. Through the dramatized death of a household animal, the scene prompts visitors to see their world as vulnerable. The coyote with a cat has elicited emotional reactions from visitors, upset by the scene. According to the curator of LA Light Motion Dreams, this exhibition, like others of the time, sought to bring emotion, drama, and intuition to move the visitor not only to think but to feel and to act on issues like environmental sustainability. Whether or not the display inspired visitors to live more sustainably, the curatorial decision to replace an expected prey animal with a companion creature made the scene resonate with many. One culture writer was alarmed by how much the cat looked like his own. It was distressing to imagine a beloved pet meeting this violent end. The cat was dead, to be sure, but the real cat died under different circumstances. The taxidermied cat was crafted, as was the coyote mount, from salvaged roadkill. Since the 1980s, natural history museums have mainly acquired their display specimens through salvage. Birds that fly into high-rises and animals that die in rehabilitation centers, for instance, may spend their afterlives on display at a museum. Predator control programs are ongoing, though bounties have been eliminated, and the remains of predators that have been taken fall into the category of salvage. It is noteworthy, then, that the Los Angeles Times announced that this particular coyote was roadkilled. It is curious, too, how that detail is at odds with the exhibit's message. For while the coyote with a cat invited museum visitors to reflect on nature's capacity to consume, that is, to consume pets and, by extension, the curated way people engage with nature, the acquisition of the specimens used in the exhibit suggests a different dynamic. As roadkill, the actual cat and coyote alike were victims of the car culture that characterizes the sprawling city of Los Angeles. The Coyote with a Cat was repurposed when LA Light Motion Dreams closed. Initially, museum leadership wanted to reproduce the pool scene in a diorama, but Tim Bovard advocated successfully for a new concept. The lush backyard, instead of a sterile pool, allowed him to showcase additional interactions between wild and domestic, as well as native and non-native life. LA's backyard illustrates what Bovard calls an in-your-face urban-wild interface. It could be that the coyote was just passing through and happened upon a meal. And yet, there are things here that make this space inviting to wild animals. A bird feeder hung from the eaves of the house draws feathered creatures that are both native and non-native. The greenery entices other birds and mammals to take shelter there. The backyard is rather lush. Perhaps this isn't a drought year. Or perhaps this imagined household ignores water rationing regulations to keep this oasis green in an otherwise semi-arid environment. With so many small critters finding comfort here, predators are sure to follow. And then there are the house cats. The back door of this home is cracked ajar, suggesting that the homeowners allow their felines to roam in the backyard where they might haunt the birds that flock there. The open door is particularly evocative. Typically, the glass of a diorama is meant to be invisible. It is a necessary component of museum infrastructure that visitors are asked to look past. Here, though, in LA's backyard, there are two panes of glass. There is the glass that protects specimens from the public. Then there is the glass of the house that visitors are asked to notice. This glass-paned door, which has failed to protect a companion animal from a wily hunter, represents the inability of people to control nature entirely. The built environment can separate the domestic from the wild, but animals, plants, and other forms of wildlife will adapt and interrupt. This has happened even within the artful construction of LA's backyard itself, in the form of a minor bug problem. Recently, Bovard removed several infested bird specimens from the scene. This staged victory of the wild over the domestic in LA's backyard reflects the impressive, expansive success of coyotes, despite over a century of attempted control and eradication efforts. Bovard stresses, though, that such an outcome is never a sure thing. The wild does not always win these contests. Just look at the region's native sagebrush habitat, which has been pushed out by farming and housing development. The exhibit text that accompanies LA's backyard asks visitors whether they have a backyard of their own or make use of shared urban spaces to consider the implications and the ethics of life at the urban-wild interface. As humans develop more and more land, we increasingly come into contact with wildlife. Coyotes have grown increasingly accustomed to life in urban areas, much to the distress of pet owners. While the text acknowledges the discomfort that such encounters cause for people, and of course for their pets, it emphasizes the coyote as native. It also calls attention to the many animals that settlers have introduced. Many species we think of as native to this region were transplanted here by humans. The opossum was first introduced into California in 1890. The fox squirrel, black rat, house mouse, house sparrow, and starling are also recent immigrants. The text does not go so far as to identify house cats as immigrants, but close readers will understand the subtext. Messaging from animal control departments all across Southern California in the early 21st century echoed the sentiment of LA's backyard. Consider the Los Angeles Animal Services flyer that informed residents matter-of-factly, "We built our city in the coyote's backyard. We should adapt to the presence of the coyote." Search this phrase today, in 2025, and the internet will return results for Calabasas, Malibu, and Agoura Hills. These cities in Los Angeles County continue to use this exact language. Los Angeles is the coyote's backyard. This reframing of the backyard, which is explicit in animal control literature and implicit in the diorama, offers a critical view that blurs the boundary between wild and domestic, and public and private spaces. The message is simple: coyotes belong. Some residents of the region have taken this message to heart. Others argue that the coyote should be removed. Many just want to know if they and their pets are safe in urban and suburban areas where coyotes also reside. While people continue to debate whether these animals are welcome in urban areas, LA's backyard historicizes the presence of coyotes. The coyote with a cat, on display now for 2 decades, contributes implicitly to efforts to manage humans rather than coyotes. Because despite extensive attempts to eradicate coyote populations, these animals trot on. Wildlife gnaws away at neat human boundaries. It does not simply persist, it co-creates the urban-wild interface. Displays like LA's backyard affirm the existence of wild things in places that do not feel wild. Whereas the older dioramas depict wild animals, even native ones, in remote, if imagined, wilderness, this newer approach communicates to visitors that wild creatures have the right to exist in human spaces. The coyote with a cat continues to generate affective responses from visitors. Some are appalled, saying things to gallery attendants or to Bovard himself in the vein of, "How can you do this?" and "I've lost cats that way." Other visitors, while disturbed, seem pleased to see their experiences of nature reflected in the museum. Not everyone is able to venture off to the Owens Valley to encounter wild coyotes, who would keep their distance from human voyeurs anyway, or travel farther afield to see the other wild creatures displayed at the museum. But everyone who comes to this museum has spent some amount of time in Los Angeles, and they may have a coyote story of their own. Setting this domestic scene behind glass validates visitors' experiences of nature. It further invites people to think differently about contested categories like what is wild and what is natural. If, as Karen Wonders has argued, the origin and popularity of the diorama is intimately connected with the disappearance of wild animals from modern society, the evolution of the medium in the early 21st century is entangled with the surprising resurgence of wildlife populations in cities. In addition to habitat dioramas, which through revision or novel presentations accustom visitors to new views on nature, there are ongoing exhibition and public engagement efforts at the NHMLA that nudge visitors toward understanding themselves as part of their environment. For instance, the museum's Nature Lab invites visitors to interact with specimens as well as living animals, including human scientists, to learn how to spot the biodiversity all around them, even in the city. These interactive exhibits exist alongside the museum's seemingly static, though frequently updated dioramas. Notably, the museum also makes decisions about what not to exhibit or accession into its collection. In 2022, following the death of an iconic LA cougar called P22, the museum announced definitively that the cat would never be put on display, and instead worked with Native partners to honor his remains as a relation. P22 was the 22nd cat collared by the National Park Service in a study of biodiversity in the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. The P stands for puma, another name for cougar. Cities are high-risk spaces for cougars and other large predators, and yet continued development, as well as ecological catastrophes like wildfires, have contributed to an increasing cougar presence in urban and suburban areas in Southern California. What's more, California cougars are now protected animals. Lion hunting incentivized by a bounty system from 1907 to 1963 and allowed as sport from 1970 to 1971 and from 1987 to 1990 was outlawed in 1990 when the citizens of California passed Proposition 117, the California Fish and Wildlife Protection Act. In instances of depredation, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife may grant permission to take a cougar, but does so only after a multi-step evaluation process that prioritizes non-lethal interventions. Currently, cougar populations in Southern and Central California are candidate species for inclusion in the California Endangered Species Act due to their status as evolutionarily significant units, genetically distinct subpopulations shaped by urbanization and development that has restricted animals' movement and limited their opportunities to breed. If advanced to formal endangerment, California would be responsible for implementing recovery efforts, including wildlife crossings. P-22 was born in the western Santa Monica Mountains in 2009 or 2010. Because male cougars will not share territory with other adult males, the young P-22 ventured off to find a new home. In 2012, he was spotted by camera traps set by biologist Miguel Orellana in Griffith Park, an urban chaparral-covered wilderness area that is home to the Los Angeles Zoo, Griffith Observatory, the Hollywood Sign Historical Landmark, miles of hiking trails, and other attractions. To get there, the cat had survived a dangerous journey, crossing the many lanes of Highway 101 and Interstate 405. Often, cougars do not survive such crossings. In undeveloped areas, cougars' home ranges can span 300 or more square kilometers. P-22's home in Griffith Park was one of the smallest ranges that scientists have ever documented, only 24 square kilometers. In 2013, a remote camera set by National Geographic photographer Steve Winter captured an image of P-22 patrolling the park with the Hollywood sign aglow in the background. In Griffith Park, the cat lived out his days in a kind of diorama, preserved in photographs and videos rather than by taxidermy. While visitors to the park were unlikely to see P-22 in the flesh, images captured by Orellana and Winter transformed him into a celebrity. Locals identified with the cat. Some saw their own immigration stories mirrored in P-22's dangerous journey. Other admirers projected their frustrations onto him, including dating woes, P-22 was a bachelor by necessity, and complaints about LA's notorious traffic, which made it unsafe for P-22 to leave Griffith Park. The cougar became the face of the city's urban wildlife, used by scientists and conservationists as a spokescreature for policies that would benefit creatures like him. As an example, in 2014, trail camera footage showed P-22 looking scrawny and mangy. He did, in fact, have mange, and his blood work revealed that he had ingested rodenticide, for which he was treated by National Park Service biologists. Within months, California legislators began to implement bans on certain rat poisons, a move that wildlife activists had long worked toward in the interests of cougars, hawks, and other predators that feed on poisoned pests. Photographs of P-22's sorry state, circulated by the Los Angeles Times, raised popular awareness of threats facing urban wildlife. His pathetic portrait, skin scabbed, ears back, and eyes heavy, perhaps from sedation, yet fixed on the viewer, was strikingly distinct from the cougars that Angelenos saw at their Natural History Museum. In the traditional wilderness diorama, the perfect cougars, though dead, were in decent shape aesthetically. In contrast, the imperfect visage of a still-living P-22 showed wild animals as real animals who live close at hand and are subject to suffering because of their proximity to people. Widely circulated images of P-22 in sickness and in health illustrated irrefutably the entanglement of wild and urban worlds. According to the camera traps that diligently recorded the park's urban wildlife, no female cougars ever joined him there. P-22 never had the opportunity to mate. While he never interacted with his own kind in Griffith Park, he did have contact with other animals that made a home there. He tended to hunt mule deer. Raccoons and coyotes were on the menu too. In 2016, security footage captured P-22 exploring the grounds of the Los Angeles Zoo. Soon after, an elderly koala named Killarney was found mauled to death. While one city council member advocated for relocating him, the public and the majority of local officials were more sympathetic with the cat's situation. The director of the Los Angeles Zoo released a statement that advocated for P-22's right to remain in the park. There's a lot of native wildlife in this area. This is their home. So we'll learn to adapt to P-22 just like he's learned to adapt to us. There was a community consensus. Instead of eliminating this predator, the humans in Griffith Park needed to protect their captive prey animals more effectively. On occasion, P-22 ventured out of Griffith Park to follow or search for prey. In 2022, he had several encounters with people and pets in the area. That November, he killed a leashed chihuahua that was out for a walk in the Hollywood Hills. Bold attacks such as this were signs of distress, according to wildlife officials. After the Chihuahua incident, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife set out to capture P-22 for evaluation. The GPS collar, which he had worn for just over a decade, allowed officials to locate him in the backyard of a home in the hillside community of Los Feliz. "We have a lot of wildlife in our neighborhood and in our yard," the homeowner told reporters. "We see a lot of coyotes, so I'm not surprised." P-22's prognosis was not good. Officials discovered that on this particular journey out of Griffith Park, he had been hit by a car. He was suffering a variety of other maladies too, including mange and ringworm infections, kidney disease, hernias, arthritis, and continued rodenticide exposure. On December 17th, 2022, P-22 was euthanized. At 12 years old or so, he had lived to be the oldest Southern California cougar on record. In captivity, male cougars can live to 20. In the wilds of Los Angeles County, their lives are shortened by a variety of factors, including competition with other males, highways that disrupt their ecological niche, and the poisons that move through the food chain. Given how successfully LA's backyard has engaged visitors through its naturalization of urban wildlife, the museum might have been expected to do something similar with P-22. Historically, it is not unusual for animals that were iconic while alive to be displayed as taxidermy or held by museums for study after death. Athletes, war heroes, astronauts, and clones, all of the non-human variety, have gone on to spend their afterlives in museum collections, as have beloved zoo animals and wild creatures that made significant impacts on their communities. The museum was even preparing for this eventuality. A year before P-22's death, as a matter of procedure, the museum had applied for a permit to take possession of the cougar's remains when he passed. Once P-22 was euthanized, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife announced that his final resting place would be at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County in order to further research efforts on mountain lion biology and conservation. Many communities were invested in what happened to P-22's remains. Some people were disturbed to learn that the cat would be studied and potentially put on display. In response to community reactions, the museum released an update via Twitter on December 22nd, while P-22's remains were still in transit to the museum. "We want to ensure that multiple voices are heard around the respectful consideration of his remains, which includes the clear confirmation that the museum will not taxidermy or display his remains. The museum committed to making decisions about what to do with P-22 in consultation with local Native communities. A day later, museum officials welcomed P-22's remains to the museum alongside descendant communities of the local Gabrielino Tongva, Tataviam, and Chumash tribes. While scientists at the museum hoped to retain some of P-22's biological material for study, members of Native communities spoke out against this project. Alan Salazar, a descendant of the Chumash tribe and a member of the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, emphasized that his communities considered the cougar a relative who ought to be honored through burial as a chief. Salazar further drew connections between Natural History Museum's treatment of non-human animals and these institutions' collecting of Native people's bodies and cultural artifacts. "We've been studied like the mountain lion has been studied," Salazar said to a reporter. "Those bones of my tribal ancestors are in boxes so they can be studied by future generations. We're not a science project." Nor was the cougar, Salazar argued. On this occasion, the museum acquiesced. Though P-22 was broadly popular among Angelenos, some of whom wanted to see him put on display, the museum prioritized the interests of Native partners. This was a demonstration of commitment to the land acknowledgement adopted by Los Angeles County, and therefore the NHMLA as a county museum, in November 2022, just weeks before the Cougar's death. What to do with P-22 was an early test of the museum's ongoing work to build relationships and conduct programs with communities descended from the original inhabitants of Los Angeles County. On March 4th, 2023, P-22 was buried near his presumed birthplace in the Santa Monica Mountains, far away from Griffith Park, in a private tribal ceremony. Some representatives from the museum and wildlife officials who had long studied the cat were in attendance at the burial, but P-22's precise resting place remains unmarked. At the request of participating tribes, the museum kept the casket used to transport his remains from the museum into the mountains so it could be repurposed for future repatriation of other animals, signaling a continued commitment to engagement with Native partners. The burial of P-22 in his birthplace introduces another ethic of wild animal display and establishes a new kind of boundary. P-22 and other urban wildlife may belong in Los Angeles, but they do not belong to Los Angeles. In 2017, while P-22 was still living out his days in the dynamic diorama of Griffith Park, the NHMLA opened The Story of P-22 to educate the public about survival challenges faced by the Cougars living in LA's backyard. The Story of P-22 is a multimedia exhibit that allows visitors to watch recorded footage of wildlife in Griffith Park, track the locations of Southern California's collared cougars in real time, and try their luck crossing a busy projection of a freeway, simulating a migration that proves fatal for so many wild animals. In recycling the phrase LA's backyard, the museum further extends the boundaries of belonging. Here, backyard refers not to private property, but to urban green spaces, freeways, foothills, and beyond, a redefinition that displaces ownership in favor of affinity and obligation. In the wake of P-22's death, museum visitors transformed the story of P-22 into a shrine, leaving tributes on Post-it notes provided by the museum. Mourners created a colorful mosaic of collective eulogy, floor to ceiling, a love letter to a lost cat. R.I.P. handsome kitty. We love you. We miss you. Thank you for what you did for Los Angeles. Some youngsters drew paw prints, hearts, or the king himself. Though his grave goes unmarked, the story of P-22 now bears an epitaph, beloved mountain lion and inspiring Angeleno. Does the designation of this singular charismatic animal as an Angeleno inspire visitors to consider other animals as locals too? The decision to keep P-22 out of view does not mean that the NHMLA is renouncing taxidermy. In September 2024, the museum reopened what was formerly called the Hall of Exotic Mammals as a temporary exhibit. In reframing dioramas, the art of preserving wilderness, visitors encounter old habitat groups with updated interpretive signage and installations crafted by contemporary artists who turn a critical eye on the medium. In a companion book, Fabricating Wilderness, exhibit developer Matt Davis, historian Araceli Ramos, and other contributors acknowledge the histories of domination and extraction that have characterized the creation of habitat dioramas and natural history museum collecting practices more broadly. Together, the cougar and coyote displays at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County illustrate a century of changing animal relations, as well as evolving museum ethics and practices. And yet, the evolution in specimen acquisition from active collection to salvage does not announce itself, nor is it obvious if dioramas have been altered, and if they have, it is not clear to a casual viewer how, why, or when these were changed. Moreover, given that the older cougar and coyote groups are physically separated from LA's backyard and the taxidermy-free story of P22, visitors may not register this narrative arc or encounter all of its components. As museologist and scholar of heritage studies Mina Lukic has observed, museums present diverse and sometimes contradictory perspectives because the stratified layers of their own past persist in the present. Visitors might leave the museum having taken on a view from an older display that the very same institution critiques in other exhibits. And yet, despite the critiques that scholars and museum practitioners alike have levied against historical habitat groups, these displays offer ecological perspectives that remain urgent, for the medium emphasizes that all beings exist within a wider ecology and a deeper history. If museum displays reflect changing animal relations and revise boundaries of belonging, where might habitat groups go from here? This much is certain. Urban predators will continue their attacks on companion animals. People will continue to debate how to coexist with flag coyotes and charismatic cougars. And the climate crisis will further force the issue of cohabitation. In January 2025, wildfires erupted in the Santa Monica and San Gabriel Mountains that neighbor Los Angeles to the north. Fast-moving flames triggered mandatory evacuation orders for nearly 200,000 people. Wild animals were forced to flee their habitats too and seek safety in more populated areas. Unusual sightings were documented, like a female cougar and her 2 cubs turning tail away from the Palisades fire, and a coyote with fur badly singed trotting in broad daylight along a roadway that would have otherwise been busy. On social media, suggestions circulated about how to help displaced wildlife. One viral Instagram post with more than 15 million views instructed Angelenos to keep their pets inside and leave bowls of water in their yards for thirsty animals passing through. They are scared, exhausted, and have also lost their homes. The authors of that post attributed the directive to CAL FIRE, though the department issued no such statement. Meanwhile, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife published stern guidance to the contrary. Do not provide food or water to wildlife. Feeding wildlife does more harm than good, as it might inspire the animals to stay in the area and lead to future conflicts. The wildfires and other natural disasters amplified by a changing climate will challenge people and other animals to negotiate new kinds of neighborliness. How then might future displays historicize, naturalize, or revise the way urban animals live together? Imagine a habitat group that documents animal-friendly infrastructure, like the wildlife crossing currently being constructed over Highway 101 to provide safe migrations between the Santa Monica Mountains and the Simi Hills. It was P22's celebrity that helped raise the funds for this project, decades in the making, which reconnects fragmented ecosystems. Picture a diorama that highlights the effects of habitat destruction by exhibiting visibly injured specimens, like the coyote with a scorched coat. Would such scenes set behind glass inspire responsibility for the natural and cultural worlds in fulfillment of the museum's mission? Or simply normalize 21st century social relations of domination? Museum practices and ethics will continue to evolve, while the futures of people, pets, and urban predators are locked in a snarl, much like a taxidermied coyote with a cat.